Hello and welcome to another episode of Katie the Science Lady. I'm Mrs. Jacobson, and today's topic is the human reproductive system. So let's learn together.
All right, y'all. I'm incredibly excited. This is one of my favorite topics to teach, both in the classroom and in general, because I think it's one of the most important things you can ever learn in your lifetime. It's important to know how your body works, and especially it's important to know how your body works for reproduction. A lot of us don't understand our bodies completely, and that's okay. So today I'm going to give you a basic introduction to the human reproductive system, and please, at any point, if you have questions, I would encourage you to jot them down, to comment with questions. I will do my best to answer them as quickly as I can. If you are one of my students, please email me with questions. If you are a student in general, feel free to email your teacher with questions. If you don't want to ask them, again, go ahead and comment on this video and I will get back to you with an answer to your question. It's important to ask questions, especially when it involves your body and how it functions. So let's go ahead and get started today. So we have multiple functions of our reproductive system, and here are some of the most important ones. We produce gametes. Now remember, gamete is another word for sex cell, or in this case, egg and sperm. Males produce sperm and females produce ova or eggs. Please keep in mind that every time I say male and female today, I'm talking about strictly biological. So XX for females, XY for males. That's all I'm ever talking about because that's kind of what we have to work with hormone-wise in this case. Sex hormone production is also a function of the reproductive system. Estrogen and progesterone are involved in pregnancy and menstruation and are the main hormones produced by females. Testosterone is the main male hormone, and it creates a lot of the male sex characteristics that you would assume. Things like facial hair, deepened voice, things like that. One of the other important functions for the reproductive system is support for a developing fetus. So this would involve the creation of the actual baby itself. It would create all the support for it, including, why am I not remembering this word? What is happening? God. So one of the other most important functions of the reproductive system is support for the developing fetus. Now, I try and kind of distinguish between the stages of development here. I won't call it a baby until it's born. I'll kind of denote that as we go through here, but it's going to involve the creation of the placenta, how the mother and child share their bloodstream and how they get nutrients to the baby, and all those things that help support the growth and development of a fetus. This is one of my favorite pictures to talk about with my students. You can see that it is an egg and many sperm cells. This is an actual picture taken. This is not a computer-generated picture. This is a real picture. There are always more sperm cells than there are egg cells. Usually millions of sperm are produced at once compared to 1 or 2 eggs. If you have 2 eggs produced, that can kind of result in twins, and we'll talk about that later. But this is the good picture so you can have an idea of the comparative sizes of these 2 different gametes. All right. Warning for pictures of diagrams of reproductive systems. So we're going to talk about the major structures in the male reproductive system and their roles in reproduction. So the first thing we're going to talk about are the testes. Their job is to produce sperm cells. They are structures of the reproductive system and the endocrine system. They are glands because they also help produce and secrete our testosterone, which is the main male sex hormone. We also have the penis as one of the major structures of the male reproductive system, and its job is to deliver sperm cells to the female reproductive system. which sounds really clinical and strange, but that is essentially its job. It also does have some functions in the excretory system with ridding the body of liquid waste. When we look at the male reproductive system, we can see more than just what I've mentioned. There are other glands here that are like the prostate gland, the seminal vesicle, and the epididymis. These are all going to be involved in creating secretions that are added to sperm that will allow them to reach the female reproductive system better. So these are also needed because they're going to add to the volume to allow those cells to reach their target, which would be the egg. So we can see here we have the testicles. They are located outside of the body. And I've already had questions about this. The reason they're located outside of the body is for temperature regulation. They are pretty delicate, and the cells that they're producing are delicate as well. And sperm cells do not function very well at high heat. So inside the body, those sperm cells tend to lose motility and ability to function properly. But if they're located outside of the body, that temperature is regulated a lot easier. All right. We're going to quickly talk about the female reproductive system. I left it all on the screen just because it's pretty complicated. So I want to go over it. If you are taking notes, there are many parts, so bear with me here. So the ovaries, their main job is to produce ova, which makes sense. And those are also called eggs. The ovaries are also the hormone center for females, and they produce and secrete estrogen and progesterone mainly. Again, females do produce a small amount of testosterone, but the two main hormones that we're going to be involving are estrogen and progesterone. The fallopian tubes, they connect the ovaries to the uterus. It's essentially just a tube that carries the egg to the uterus. And the uterus itself is the organ where the baby will grow, or where a fetus will grow. It is a small, really muscular organ because it has to expand to fit a child. And it's going to provide most of the support for that developing embryo or fetus. Finally, it's going to contract during childbirth. It's a muscle, so it can contract to push the baby out. The last thing we need to talk about is the vagina, which is the external opening for the female reproductive system. And its job is to allow sperm cells to enter the female reproductive system. It also allows babies to exit the female reproductive system. So it's really just an opening to allow sperm in and babies out. Now, if we look at it like this, we can see the internal parts of the female reproductive system. Shockingly, not quite as complicated as the male reproductive system. We have two ovaries here, one on either side of the uterus. We have these kind of, I don't even know what to call, they look like feathers on the end, but they are the fallopian tubes that connect to the uterus. The uterus is kind of triangularly shaped, and it's about the size of a pear, so like your fists together kind of, so fairly small, but it's very elastic, so the uterus will expand to accommodate an entire baby if needed. We have also this opening here called the cervix, so the vagina is not just the opening to the reproductive system, it is just the opening to the outside. The opening to the uterus itself is called the cervix. And sperm has to go through all of these layers in order to get to an egg. Eggs are typically fertilized either in the fallopian tube or in the top part of the uterus. So typically they're fertilized somewhere in that fallopian tube. So they have to travel pretty far in order to get there. There are a couple other systems involved in reproduction, and I've really already talked about them. The endocrine system produces all the hormones involved, whether it's female or male. Testes and ovaries are part of both, and it's hard for me to separate them in my mind because they're so heavily involved in both that really you can't think of one without the other. Hormones produced in the brain also affect sperm and egg production. They affect menstruation, which is the normal monthly cycle for a woman to release an egg in order for it to become fertilized. Hormones produced, they will affect for pregnancy and childbirth. They govern pretty much everything in our reproductive system. This is a picture here of our endocrine system. It does include glands for both male and female. So these are other glands that we've talked about already with the endocrine system. Down here we have the ovaries, and then we also have the testes. So that's where they would be located relatively in a person. And then we can also talk about the circulatory system, which moves our hormones and the muscular system, which would then contract the uterus to actually birth the child. So these systems are involved in reproduction. I would say, they're involved at the same amount as the endocrine system, but without the endocrine system, fertilization isn't even possible because you need the endocrine system to produce hormones that allow us to make those gametes or the sex cells. Hormones, again, they're secreted by endocrine cells. They go into the bloodstream, and then they will travel to a target cell, wherever that may be in the body. Muscular system we see here, this is a uterus that has been expanded. I had a student one year that said, "Miss, you are playing with me. That is a balloon." It is not a balloon. It is a picture that shows the uterus, and these muscles near the top contract to push the baby out. So this is theoretically what it would look like when the uterus expands to accommodate a child. So this is not a balloon, I promise. A couple other things I want to kind of walk you through. One of them includes the menstrual cycle. Gentlemen watching this, you have probably not thought about this too much in your life, and that's okay. I wanted to make sure I give you an overview of what's actually happening during the menstrual cycle, just as an FYI for your life, because you have a mother, you may have sisters, etc. Ladies, this is just for you and your body. It is a normal, natural change that happens in the uterus and ovaries, in the ovaries and uterus that make pregnancy possible. So it is completely normal and natural. Not everybody has the same menstrual cycle. Some of them are different lengths, and sometimes people's cycles aren't regular. So this can be a very difficult topic for some women if they do not have a normal menstrual cycle. Now, these are changes that are happening in the uterus and ovaries. They are not always like this. So this is kind of a monthly change. It is the shedding of the uterine lining. So it is not straight blood during a period or during menstruation. It is actually the lining of the uterus that is leaving the body. Now, it includes a lot of blood because if an egg is fertilized with a sperm and a baby is going to eventually grow, you want lots of blood there in order to give nutrients and oxygen to that developing fetus. Now, if that is not used, that uterine lining needs to be removed. And that's what's happening in menstruation. It has blood, nutrients, and cells in it, which is why it's not exactly just blood. This only happens when an egg hasn't been fertilized. If an egg is fertilized, that uterine lining has to stay because it's going to support that developing fetus. Over here is kind of a general graph of a couple of the different hormones involved in the menstrual cycle. It starts here from day 1 to around day 7, what we call the period or menstruation, when the uterine lining is leaving the body. Then you can see how different hormones are enacting during different phases. About halfway through the menstrual cycle, ovulation occurs. And that is when an egg is released from the ovary and goes through the fallopian tubes. Right around this time here, right around the middle of the menstrual cycle, is when it's possible for an egg to be fertilized. So that's called ovulation. So right around ovulation is when fertilization can occur. Now, it can occur at any part of the menstrual cycle, but it's most likely to occur in the middle when ovulation is happening. So just keep that in mind, that just because you're in the period phase of the menstrual cycle, that does not mean that you can't be pregnant. Pregnancy is possible at any point during this cycle. If you need more information about the menstrual cycle or menstruation at all, please go to this website, www.womenshealth.gov. It has a lot of helpful information beyond what I can share, and I will put the link down below this video as well. All right, one of the last things we need to talk about, I say one of the last, but we need to talk about fertilization. And this is the part where all my students start cringing and hiding themselves, which is usually pretty telling. In fertilization, sperm is ejaculated into the vagina during intercourse. So this is literally sperm meets egg. The sperm travels through the vagina, through the cervix, through the uterus, and into the fallopian tubes where it can meet an egg. This is what I talked about when I showed you the diagram of the female reproductive system. It has to travel through quite a few steps in order to even meet up with an egg. Only one single sperm can fertilize one egg. So in this picture that we see here, There are thousands, sometimes millions of sperm in only one egg. Whichever sperm reaches the middle of the egg first is the winner. It is the one that will fertilize and become part of that initial cell called a zygote. This is something that I usually say to my students because I don't know why this gets lost, but just needs clarification. Anytime a penis and vagina are near each other or are touching, egg and sperm can theoretically meet. Because all you need to do is have an egg meet a sperm and that's it. That is fertilization that can develop into a baby. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. I just feel like I always have to say this explicitly because my students sometimes have questions about this. Okay. When we talk about a baby developing, a lot of us just think, okay, it grows and that's it. But there are some kind of important things to know. Once an egg has been fertilized, it is implanted. And that means it kind of becomes part of the thick wall of the uterus, and it forms something called the placenta. And the placenta is that kind of fluid sac that the baby will grow in, or that the zygote will grow in. Over here we have a picture of a developing fetus. You can see eyes and ears and fingers and kind of see ribs and some veins and arteries. It's pretty cool. And that occurs pretty quickly, but the baby starts out as a single cell called a zygote. It will grow into an embryo and it gets its oxygen and nutrition from that umbilical cord. The umbilical cord connects to its mother. So mom and baby share a bloodstream. So what mom eats, the baby eats. What mom takes into her body, baby takes into its body. This is why moms are encouraged not to drink much alcohol when they are pregnant. They're encouraged not to smoke, not to do any sort of drugs, and they have to be very careful about medications that they take because whatever they put into their body also goes through to their baby. As the baby grows here, you can see the placenta growing around it. You see the umbilical cord is that kind of, it looks like a cord that wraps through and would go out the end of the placenta connecting to the mom. The umbilical cord is what is cut when you're born, and that's where your belly button is. So the other end of that umbilical cord connects to where your belly button would be. Okay, this is the question I get all the time. I'll get to the end, and then the only question all my students want to know is, how are twins made? So how do we get twins? There's a couple different ways, so I'll run through them pretty quickly here. Sometimes during ovulation, a woman will release 2 eggs out of her ovary instead of 1. So there are 2 eggs that travel down the fallopian tube, and they can be fertilized by 2 different sperm. So you have 2 separate eggs and 2 separate sperm. They will develop separately, and these will become fraternal twins, not identical twins, because there are 2 different eggs and 2 different sperm. Now, identical twins, the 1 egg is released from the ovary and is fertilized by 1 sperm. Sometimes that single cell divides and then becomes 2 separate fetuses or feti. And those 2 fetuses are going to be identical because they came from 1 egg and 1 sperm. So that's the difference between identical twins and fraternal twins, because fraternal twins are really just brother and brother, or sister and sister, or brother and sister, but they happen to be born at the same time. They are completely different genetic combinations, but they were just born at the same time. And that's it for today.
So the human reproductive system has several different functions. One of the first functions is that it needs to produce the sperm cells and egg cells that will eventually unite to potentially become a child. In addition, the endocrine system helps the reproductive system produce hormones needed for all of these changes. So in females, it produces progesterone and estrogen mainly, and in males, it produces mainly testosterone. These 2 systems are so intertwined that it can be difficult to talk about one without directly talking about the other. In my mind, reproductive system and endocrine system, they have to work together. If you don't have the right hormones, the reproductive system is useless. A couple of other body systems that allow the fetus to develop include the circulatory system, which passes nutrients and blood from mother to child, and then also the muscular system, which will eventually work to push the baby out of the uterus into the world. The biggest key takeaway from today is the actual process of fertilization, which is when an egg is released from the fallopian tubes, and then a sperm travels through the vagina up to the cervix to meet the egg and fertilize it. Remember, when an egg is fertilized, it takes the 23 chromosomes from the egg and the 23 chromosomes from the sperm, unites it into 46 chromosomes in a single cell that can potentially become a child. That is it for today. If you need any other information about contraception, about menstruation, menopause, etc., please see some of the links that I have below the video. They are different websites that are available for your perusal. And as always, I hope you had fun. I hope you learned something, and I'll see you later.